Yesterday, while the rest of the internet was locked in a fierce debate over which cat video was the cutest, a quietly released data packet from 3i Atlas landed in the scientific community. And what it reveals doesn't just challenge the mainstream narrative about this mysterious visitor, it completely obliterates it. We're talking about non-gravitational acceleration patterns that make absolutely no sense for a natural comet, a chemical signature that's conveniently being ignored, and trajectory adjustments that defy every model they've shown us. But here's the best part. They're calling it normal, predictable, and entirely within expectations, which is fascinating considering their own data says otherwise. It's like your calculator telling you that 2 + 2 = 5, and you trying to convince everyone it's a bold new branch of mathematics. Before we dive into the numbers they're desperately hoping you won't scrutinize, hit that subscribe button and join a community that actually asks the uncomfortable questions. We need more people around here who understand that official explanation often translates to, please stop looking at this. Basically, we need more delightful troublemakers like us. Have you ever noticed how every unexplained celestial phenomenon gets immediately wrapped up with the most convenient explanation possible? How the most bizarre signals from deep space are always dismissed as equipment malfunctions or natural interference? Or better yet, how every interstellar object that shows impossible behavior suddenly becomes just another comet, the moment it starts getting too much attention? Seriously, if a spaceship flew by with neon signs flashing, "We come in peace," NASA would probably classify it as an unusually cooperative weather balloon. It's almost like there's a playbook for this stuff, and spoiler alert, it's getting old. Okay, forget everything you've been told about 3i Atlas being a routine interstellar visitor. Let's start with Exhibit A, the piece of evidence that should have alarm bells ringing across every observatory on Earth. The acceleration data from October 2025 released just last week. According to the official tracking measurements, 3i Atlas underwent a velocity change that cannot be explained by solar radiation pressure, outgassing, or any known gravitational influence from bodies in our solar system. We're talking about a delta V of approximately 0.4 millimeters per second squared, applied over a sustained period of 72 hours, beginning on October 12th and mysteriously ceasing on October 15th. And for anyone who's not an astrophysicist on NASA's payroll, let me translate, that's not a brief anomaly or a measurement error. That's a consistent, directional thrust applied with remarkable precision over 3 full days. Precision like that doesn't happen by accident. It usually comes with an instruction manual and a pilot. The establishment's explanation? Asymmetric outgassing from volatile ice sublimation triggered by solar heating. Which sounds perfectly reasonable until you actually look at the spectroscopic data from that exact time period, and here's where things get genuinely entertaining. The infrared observations taken during those critical 72 hours show no corresponding increase in coma activity, no jets, no plumes, no enhanced dust production. Nothing that would indicate the massive outgassing event required to produce that kind of acceleration. In fact, if anything, the coma was quieter during the acceleration period than it was in the weeks before and after. So we're supposed to believe that 3i Atlas experienced its most significant non-gravitational acceleration during its calmest observed period, which is the scientific equivalent of your car speeding up after you turn off the engine and drain the gas tank. But it gets better, and by better, I mean worse for the official narrative. The direction of this acceleration wasn't random. It was oriented almost perfectly perpendicular to the solar radiation pressure vector, which is exactly the orientation that would minimize any natural explanation. If this were truly caused by outgassing, you'd expect the thrust vector to align with the sun-facing hemisphere, where solar heating would be most intense. Instead, the acceleration vector was offset by 87 degrees from that expected angle, a deviation that multiple independent tracking stations confirmed. The European Space Agency acknowledged this discrepancy in a footnote, an actual footnote in their preliminary report, describing it as requiring further investigation, which is diplomatic code for, we have no idea what's happening here, but we're really hoping you won't make a big deal about it. Now, let's talk about the chemical composition, because this is where the whole "it's just a comet" story completely falls apart. Every natural comet we've ever observed from our solar system has a predictable ice composition. Water ice dominates, followed by carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia in varying but consistent ratios. These ratios are like fingerprints, telling us about the formation conditions in the protoplanetary disk billions of years ago. The preliminary spectroscopic analysis of 3i Atlas, published in the supplementary data section of the IAU Circular on October 28th, shows something genuinely bizarre. an ice composition with a deuterium to hydrogen ratio that's off the charts, nearly 3 times higher than any known solar system comet, and a carbon monoxide abundance that's spectacularly low, almost undetectable in fact. The mainstream response? They're calling it evidence of formation in a colder, denser molecular cloud, which conveniently explains away any discrepancy. The problem with that explanation, and it's a rather significant one, is that the same analysis shows trace elements that should not exist in a pristine interstellar object. We're talking about technetium-99, an element with a half-life of only 211,000 years, detected in the dust spectrum at concentrations that shouldn't be there if this object formed billions of years ago in some distant star system. Technetium is primarily produced through stellar nucleosynthesis in specific types of stars, and here's the fun part, through artificial nuclear processes. Finding it in measurable quantities on an allegedly ancient interstellar comet is like finding a smartphone in a pharaoh's tomb, but apparently, we're all supposed to nod politely and accept that this is within the range of natural variation. Here's something they really don't want you thinking about too carefully: the trajectory itself. When 3I Atlas was first detected on September 27th by the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System in Hawaii, its hyperbolic orbit was immediately flagged as potentially interstellar with an eccentricity well above 1 K, gammas CSE, and a velocity exceeding solar system escape velocity, standard stuff for a visitor from beyond, or so it seemed. But as tracking data accumulated throughout October, something peculiar emerged. The trajectory showed systematic deviations from a purely gravitational path, deviations that accumulated in a non-random pattern. By late October, when observatories worldwide had enough data points to reconstruct the orbit with high precision, it became clear that 3I Atlas had made at least 2 unexplained course corrections since entering the inner solar system in late August. The official explanation calls these natural orbital perturbations from outgassing events, but the timing is spectacularly convenient. The first major deviation occurred when 3I Atlas was approximately 2.1 astronomical units from the Sun, right at the boundary where water ice typically begins sublimating, except the spectroscopic evidence shows minimal water content, so that explanation doesn't hold up. The second deviation happened during that mysterious 72-hour period in mid-October, when the object was already well past perihelion and moving away from the Sun, a time when outgassing should be decreasing, not producing the strongest acceleration event of the entire apparition. It's almost like someone or something was making deliberate adjustments to the trajectory. But don't worry, NASA assures us it's all perfectly normal and requires no further investigation beyond the standard protocols. What do you guys think? Which piece of this puzzle seems the most suspicious to you? For me, it has to be the complete absence of any enhanced coma activity during those 72 hours of unexplained acceleration. That's not just convenient, that's statistically impossible if we're dealing with natural outgassing, and it feels less like a natural phenomenon and more like a carefully controlled maneuver that someone desperately wants us to ignore. Let's address the elephant in the observatory: the fragmentation event. On November 1st, just 3 days ago, 3I Atlas suddenly broke apart into at least 7 distinct fragments, each following slightly different trajectories as they continue their journey out of the inner solar system. The establishment immediately labeled this a routine tidal disruption event, suggesting that the structural stresses from its close solar approach finally caught up with the object, causing it to crumble. It's a neat explanation, one that conveniently ends any further interesting observations. But there's a glaring problem. 3I Atlas passed its closest approach to the Sun on October 8th, nearly a month before this supposed stress-induced breakup. If tidal forces were going to tear this object apart, they would have done so at perihelion, when those forces were at maximum strength, not 3 weeks later when it was cruising through a relatively calm region of space at 1.8 astronomical units from the Sun. But here's what makes this fragmentation truly fascinating. The timing coincides almost perfectly with increased observation attention. After the acceleration data was published in the supplementary reports on October 28th, several independent research groups began requesting additional observation time on major telescopes, specifically to study these anomalous behaviors. Within 72 hours of those requests being logged, 3I Atlas conveniently disintegrates into multiple pieces, making precise spectroscopic and photometric analysis significantly more difficult, if not impossible. The fragments are now dispersed over a volume of space that would require coordinated observations from multiple facilities to properly characterize, and good luck getting that kind of telescope time allocated for what the mainstream is calling routine cometary debris. It's all normal, entirely expected, and, in their words, completely routine, which is exactly what you'd expect them to say if they wanted this story to disappear as quickly as possible. The fragmentation itself shows another peculiarity that's being quietly ignored in the official reports. High-resolution imaging from the Hubble Space Telescope on November 2nd revealed that the 7 main fragments are not following purely ballistic trajectories, as you'd expect from debris fields. Instead, the spacing and velocity differences between fragments suggest a separation event that released kinetic energy far exceeding what internal stresses or spin-up could produce. We're talking about separation velocities on the order of several meters per second, when natural fragmentation typically produces velocities measured in centimeters per second. To achieve those kinds of separation speeds through natural processes, you'd need either a catastrophic internal explosion, for which there's zero spectroscopic evidence of any explosive volatile release, or an external impact, which nobody observed and would be statistically improbable given the low density of debris in that region of space. So what are we left with? An interstellar visitor that accelerates without visible outgassing, contains chemical anomalies that shouldn't exist in a natural object, makes course corrections at suspiciously convenient times, and then breaks apart in a manner inconsistent with natural fragmentation, right when people start asking too many questions. The establishment wants you to look at each of these anomalies in isolation, to accept each convenient explanation one at a time without connecting the dots. But we're not going to do that, because when you step back and look at the complete picture, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Remember those questions I posed at the beginning? Why is every unexplained celestial phenomenon immediately given the most convenient explanation? Because admitting uncertainty would require continued investigation, continued funding, and continued public attention on something they clearly want buried. Why are the most bizarre signals from space always dismissed as interference or equipment malfunctions? Because acknowledging genuine anomalies would force uncomfortable questions about what we're actually observing, and whether our current understanding of the universe is as complete as we're told. And why does every interstellar object showing impossible behavior suddenly become just another comet the moment it gets attention? Because the alternative, that we're observing something artificial, something designed, something that doesn't fit our neat little models, is a conversation they're absolutely not ready to have. The data is there, hiding in plain sight in supplementary reports, footnotes, and buried data tables that most people will never read. The acceleration that defies natural explanation, recorded by multiple tracking stations with consistent measurements across different observation methods. The chemical composition that makes no sense for a pristine ancient object, with isotope ratios and trace elements that scream artificial origin or, at minimum, some process we don't understand. The trajectory corrections that align perfectly with what you'd expect from controlled maneuvers, not random outgassing events. And finally, the convenient fragmentation that occurs at exactly the right moment to shut down detailed investigation, despite occurring under conditions that make natural breakup extremely unlikely. They're hoping you'll accept the easy answers, scroll past this story, and move on to the next distraction. They're counting on most people not having the time or inclination to dig into the actual data, to read past the press release headlines and examine what the numbers actually say. But you're here, which means you're not most people, and you understand that the most interesting truths are usually the ones buried under layers of nothing to see here and perfectly explainable. The evidence for something genuinely anomalous happening with 3i Atlas is overwhelming when you actually look at the complete data set rather than accepting the sanitized version they're feeding the mainstream. Every convenient explanation falls apart under scrutiny. Every dismissal of anomalous data reveals itself as intellectual laziness or deliberate obfuscation. Whether this object is a natural phenomenon we simply don't understand yet, a visitor from a radically different stellar environment with properties we've never encountered, or something more exotic and uncomfortable to consider, one thing is absolutely certain. It's not the simple story they're selling. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next investigation.